Welcome to Just an Average Citizen, the podcast that helps to educate, inform, and empower you to make an impact in Abilene and the Big Country. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so sorry for being absent last week. I was out of town attending a Patriot Academy constitutional defense course with my husband and some friends, and we actually met some other Abilenians there. It was great. We had a fabulous weekend, and so while I was out of town, I knew I probably would record the podcast out of town because I can't do it until the end of the week. But unfortunately, there really didn't seem to be a lot that happened last week in the city, and it didn't merit enough for me to do an entire podcast just to announce what was coming this week. So I apologize if you were left hanging dry, but this is a great time for me to point out that it is early on in our podcast journey. So if you would help me out by subscribing and sharing this with family and friends, because I bet, or I could imagine, that there are not a whole lot of municipal podcasts available to many communities. So bravo to us here in Abilene. We have some opportunities to learn what's going on in our city, because I do believe strongly that if we start here and improve what's going on in Abilene and the Big Country, then it's going to have positive effects through our state and our nation. So I hope that you will do that and continue joining us in what's to come, because I think some exciting things are up ahead in the year to come. So I hope you can tell I am wearing my little llama sweatshirt. It says Happy Lamaka because it's actually the fifth night or the fifth day of Hanukkah. While I'm not Jewish, I love and have some great admiration for some people who are. And so I love getting to celebrate because it makes me feel close to them. And it's also just a lovely story of hearing about God's provision that happened around the time of the feast of the Festival of Lights. So check that out if you haven't heard about the Maccabees. It's a pretty amazing story, and I love to celebrate it. So I thought before we jumped into any kind of official news, the one thing I did not report on because we didn't have a podcast last week was the fact that we had a big event in the city last Tuesday. We had the train sculpture revealing, the Christmas tree lighting, and the parade downtown. And so I drug my family, and we got some of our friends to go with us. It was so fun enjoying the evening with them. And when we showed up for the train sculpture, I didn't realize it was going to be such a small crowd. So I was a little disappointed, not knowing what I missed. And then about 10 minutes in, this big throng of people came out of City Hall, and I realized maybe we had missed something because all they did was take they unveiled the sculpture and there was not one word spoken. So maybe I'm still a little clueless on what's going on in our city, but I did get to see all the photo ops and a lot of important people in our city, and it was fun to say hello to them in a friendly setting where it feels a little bit more natural to engage with people outside of the chamber room upstairs. The Christmas tree was beautiful. We enjoyed some espresso oak while we waited, so it all worked out, and I will say that is the longest parade I have ever been to. I didn't realize there was over 150 entries in the parade, so I hope maybe next time we can limit that a little bit so it can be more enjoyable for all of us, because we never got to see the end of it because we had to go home, but it was fun. And as I was walking back, one of my favorite pictures of the night was walking back, and of course I didn't have my good camera with me, I just had my phone, so I took a picture of this beautiful Christmas tree all lit up with the moon above it, and we had some people walking in front of City Hall, and it just was a very magical moment for me. The picture doesn't do justice because the moon is so fun to take pictures of, but it was a beautiful evening. I'm so glad we went and enjoyed making memories with our family. So what I thought was most important to focus on, because we're kind of at the end of the year, there's not a lot going on in some ways, and in some ways things are moving forward full speed ahead. And so one of the things I know is that we want to be more informed and educated. And what do we do that? We find reliable and trustworthy news sources. And I will say sometimes it's challenging to find those here locally because there is a bent of presenting information from one perspective. And while that's okay, as long as we know that's their perspective, we can look at the news and take from it what we can in order to figure out what we need to know from the information presented. And so there were several opportunities this week to test the validity of what's being presented through the filter of truth. And so I wanted to show you a couple of opportunities that if you just sat down, took in the information and went on your way, you would have been misled, misinformed, and really had no clue what was going on. So I know that we have been very much aware, many of us, especially those of you who listen to the podcast right now, know about what happened on June 22nd when the city council decided to have a discussion about the sanctuary city for the unborn, which was unprecedented on several levels. First of all, it was unprecedented because never in the history of our city has the citizens been able to get 6,500 signatures, the requirement, because you have to get 10% of the registered voters in order to force something to go on the city council agenda. And once we were successful able to do that, then the city council chose to let the voters have a say. They didn't even vote on it. They didn't even want to talk about it, really. They just wanted the voters to decide. And so they sent it to the ballot in November. And what do you know? The majority of citizens wanted this ordinance to be put into place to protect all life. And it was a very clear-cut decision made by the voters. So what was surprising was then follow around from November to a few months later in June when they wanted to have a discussion about it. And it was very bizarre because the city charter actually doesn't say anything about city or citizen initiative ordinances. So basically, the only thing in the city charter it said is that the city council has full authority to alter ordinances. That's very normal because ordinances are how municipalities make law. However, this was voted on by the citizens. It was encouraged to be voted on by the council and the citizens. And so it was just a weird situation. And so while even though the majority of the people present at the June 22nd council was in favor of leaving the amendment as is, regardless of whether or not the elected officials thought people were informed, regardless of confusing terms, regardless of anything, the citizens voted on it and they wanted it to stay as is. And unfortunately, the council chose not to listen to the majority present like they've done in other circumstances, and they decided to form a subcommittee to meet on it of 5 people, including 2 councilmen and some citizens. And so while it was an open meeting, we weren't given much information about it. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to get off in the weeds in here, but I'm just trying to give the details. We didn't know much about what was going on until it was placed on the city council agenda a couple of weeks ago. And so now they have added some amendments to the ordinance's first reading at the last council meeting on Thursday, December 7th. And so there'll be one more reading at the next city council meeting, and it'll be on the regular agenda so that if citizens want to engage in a conversation about it, that would be great. However, this is where it comes in. The news decided to present information, which was fine, and it's great to inform citizens of what's going on. The first one that was interesting is KTAB News, and what's confusing is you would go to their page that talked about proposed ordinance change could allow abortion-inducing drugs under certain circumstances in Abilene. And it was posted December 4th, and it was updated December 4th. And so we have this newscast that I'll keep playing while I'm talking about it, because in this newscast, it says tomorrow there's going to be a city council meeting. And it's like, wait a minute, that's confusing. The city council meeting can't be on Tuesday. It's supposed to be on Thursday. And so I even went and looked and made sure I didn't miss a special meeting. Cause I've missed stuff before. So I checked the calendar. I was like, nope, there's nothing special going on here. So it was really confusing. And so then when I saw former councilwoman Donna Albus on it, I knew it was the video that they showed beforehand in the June meeting, because I'm a nerd and pay attention to details like that. And so then what happens is you come down here, and I'll just close this out. You come down here and read things, and it's like, it's kind of confusing. There's some statements made, but what I thought was most interesting is here's this news station who's been coming to city council meetings forever, and they made the statement, if the city council members approve the proposed changes, then a public hearing on the amendments will be held at City Hall December 21st at 8:30 a.m. Now, technically that's true, because the ordinance was on its first reading in the last council meeting. It was put on the consent agenda. And if you've been following me for half a hot minute, you know that the consent agenda is a time where they vote in a grouping of things for administrative purposes. And in all fairness, I understand the first reading is not as important as the second reading. And so I know that if I had reached out to a councilman, he would have pulled the ordinance if we want to discuss it. But I understood the process, so I didn't feel it was needed. So what I'm saying is, it wasn't approved. So then the public hearing, it was the first reading. And then the second reading is where it's final and there's an easier opportunity for you to make a public comment. So that was the first concern for me. But there's some other things I would encourage you to read and see if you can find the things that don't make sense based on what the ordinance was, 16 to 18 pages. And it was made, several comments were made that the citizens couldn't have known what they were voting on because it was too complicated. And that's another story and another conversation maybe for our next podcast. But what I wanted to say is this was a confusing podcast, news report, because it had a June video with a current article that wasn't completely accurate in several places, and there was no distinguishing the two. So a lot of people were confused, and I should have known when one of my friends was like, "Oh yeah, I heard about it." I was like, "What, you heard about it?" And then I realized it was with the Big Country homepage. So kudos for them for trying to cover it, but big goose eggs on trying to cover it accurately. Then I believe it was yesterday, another article, or I'm sorry, this is Monday, so it was on Friday, that the next article opportunity came up from the Abilene Reporter News. And I think it's interesting. Now I've scrolled down to this part because I'm going longer than I even wanted to on this, but I wanted you to see that it says, in the original ordinance, specific abortion-inducing drugs were deemed contraband and unlawful to possess, which is factually inaccurate. That is factually inaccurate. It was, you are not allowed to have these drugs for the purposes of inducing an abortion. There were other drugs. The drugs have other uses, so it wasn't canceling you to use helpful drugs. It was to use it for solely an abortion. And then I thought I'd come down here and show you this other part, which, again, I have talked to those who know more than me. So I'm not speaking out of just my ability or my intelligence. It's from those who know more than me. It says here, in a nod to perhaps future charges, the sanctuary ordinance declared that any person, firm, or corporation violating the provisions of this ordinance shall be deemed to have committed a misdemeanor and upon conviction, therefore, shall be fined in accordance with Chapter 1. This is not from the ordinance, but it's in quotes, and it's leading you to believe it's from the ordinance. It might be from Section 1-9 of the code, but it is not from the ordinance. So just those two areas, I just want you to know that if you do not take the time to make yourself informed, you can be misled. And the problem is then when you have conversations in the public with your friends or in your day-to-day life, it can lead to conversations that are not helpful, and it does not inform us and it does not educate us on how we can better make an impact. We need to know the facts and the details. And so if you've never read an ordinance, I will tell you this is a great ordinance to start with because it's not too long. It is a little bit long, but not too long. And we can do hard things. So I just wanted to point out to you, be careful that you use the news to give you a springboard to find out more information. It is not the place where you just go, okay, if they said it, it must be true. And I think those are two extremes. I'm not thinking that everyone believes the news 100%, but I just want you to know that it is subtle. And sometimes it takes a little bit of forethought to go, oh, wait, this is not what this ordinance says. And this is a perfect example. However, I will talk more about what it was discussed at the city council meeting, but I hope that helps you. And I hope that wasn't too much, personal details in there, but it is important to understand how things work. And for those who are still learning, this is a good place to go, wow, they talked about something going on with the ordinance. Where can I find that information to see if I know what's really going on? All right. So now let's go ahead and go into the week in review. This, I think, is one of my favorite weeks of the month. I just love these meetings. I'm enjoying getting to be a part of them. I still haven't gotten to go to all of them, so I'm still hoping to make time, but I'm learning the rhythm of how these meetings fall and being able to start prepare and go. It's only 1 week of the month where it is really kind of busy, but I can do that one time a month. So let's start with the first meeting that happened this week. It was the Planning and Zoning Board. And I just like these guys. I enjoy their knowledge. From what I can tell, these people have been working in this industry a long time and they know what they're talking about and they do a good job. It was a little light as far as board members go. There was only 4 present. And so they did have a quorum to make votes be legal to pass. But if one decided not to, it could cause havoc for those who were presenting items. And so Clint gave everybody a chance to table it until there was more people there, which I thought was very kind because he didn't have to. And so I've really appreciate what they do. All right. So the first thing I want to point out to you is this. This has been something that I know it's been a problem for a long time for these poor residents who live here. And I say poor residents because they just want what they want. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with property, the owners of the property do have a little bit of leeway to do what they want over what you, the non-property owner, wants. And so, this is where I am trying to help step in and give you the information so you can come to the table at the right time to have the conversation. And so this was something we've observed. We've talked about it in previous podcasts. And so I just wanted to point out again that because of the concern of the citizens, the property owner actually found a way to move into something that he thought would benefit the residents better so that their homes would be maintained at a level that they desired. And it was interesting to hear the conversations. The residents didn't understand that there's only so much the city can do. For example, traffic on roadways, that's not the city's issue, especially one that's run by TxDOT. And Buffalo Gap is a TxDOT road that they don't have any say on. So while I understand there are other issues like, the idea of Chick-fil-A came to mind where we've relocated Chick-fil-A because of traffic issues, that is something that is feasible when both parties want to work together for that purpose. But I think there's not a lot of situations to fix yet because the proposed plans have not even been established. They're just trying to establish the proper zoning so they can move forward. And so I thought it was really an interesting conversation. I, again, appreciate learning what's going on so that in the future there is a technical, I think this was the one. Yes, this was the one where it was confusing. There was some information that had been presented and it was confusing to not only the residents, but to the property owner. And so it was so confusing that Robert Hanna, first time I've ever seen him do it, showed up at the planning and zoning meeting to make sure that there was a pause so that they could make sure everything was done correctly. So while the board wanted to approve what was being requested, I think, or discuss and make a decision, I don't know if they were going to approve it. It seemed like it. They were going to. The city staff needed to fix some errors that they had made. And I thought that was really interesting that it was just a small thing, but when you make things legally incorrect, you have to do them correctly. So it's tabled, unfortunately, for another month. Now, then we moved on to the next part, which was, let me see what my next tab is. This particular zoning, this is this is 707, and they wanted to make this all, I can't remember, we've talked about this before, but the land was split up in two different sections and they wanted it all be conformed so that they could do some more potential businesses here. And it was actually approved by the Planning and Zoning Board last month. However, the notification zone was not correct and they had to readjust that so that they could make it again. It was just interesting because I've not really seen this ever happen before, but two particular mistakes that caused some hiccups for the people in process trying to develop things on their property were slowed down a little bit. And then I think finally this was also because they didn't have enough people. They had 4 people and they really wanted to have a discussion about it. And the chairperson thought it would be better to wait again because there was no time sensitive information happening with this particular item. They waited till they could have more people at the next meeting to discuss it better. And if there's not enough people, they'll just move forward. But we saw the proposal or the presentation last time. This is the RAI overlay boundaries. And I did some research. I worked really hard. It's Rebuild Abilene Infill. And this is targeting areas of infill to improve vacant or dilapidated parts of our city so that there can be something healthy. And what's interesting is we'll find some of those opportunities happening in the meeting that happened later, which was the Board of Building Standards meeting. Okay, I think that's all for this meeting. There was some interesting conversation and there's some back and forth, and I really appreciate the civility with which how things were handled. And I'm just a fan of this board. I think they do a great job, and I'm impressed with how they handle things. And I look forward to more good things coming out of this board. Now, the next meeting was a Child Advocacy Board meeting. They don't record it. And like I said, I was out of town. I just didn't have time to go. I'd really like to check this out. They voted on board positions. They did some other things. And I love this part. It says down here, the next meeting will be February 6th. So I went ahead and put it on my calendar so I can make sure I'm prepared to potentially go to that next time. All right. The other thing I noticed, which I forgot to mention for the planning and zoning meeting, is they had minutes available for you to read on. And this one does not. It doesn't have anything but the agenda. And even though this is highlighted as the agenda packet, it's just the agenda. And so I'm sure if I ask for it, if I did an open records or a FOIA, they would give them to me. I'm not sure yet if I need to know that information. So I'll go to a meeting first and see what exactly they talk about to understand the whole process. I find that works a whole lot better. Okay, so let's go to the next meeting, which was the Board of Building Standards. Again, I think these gentlemen, and I'm trying to remember if there's a lady on this one, I can't remember. They do a good job of working through the process, and we'll get to the end to see exactly what they accomplished this year, which I thought was very impressive. Okay, so this first one I thought was an interesting one. This particular property had no electricity since it was inactive utilities since 2010. Okay, this has been in the works for a long time. However, we have very resourceful people in our city, and they used utensils to be able to get to the, let's see if we can get to it. I got to show you the picture of it. Yes, here we go. They got electricity for their tent that they were squatting on the property, and they got their tent hooked up with some utensils, which I thought was very resourceful, illegal and not good, but resourceful. And then I wanted to point out to this one because I thought it was an interesting scenario. So here's a particular property, and when you hear the city's presentation, you're like, wow, this sounds terrible. But then you get the other side. And the gentleman that owned this property got up and explained the circumstances, and I thought it was very telling. Again, I haven't had a chance to verify this, and I'm not sure if there's really a way for me to verify it, but what happened was there was a tenant who was acquired through the was living here when the property was acquired. They had worked out a deal, got it all taken care of. Even when this lady was behind on her rent, they still made it a way for her to live there. And then it got to where there needed to be some repairs done on this property, and the tenant was not willing to work with the landlord. And so it came to a place where the constable had to be called out, and things didn't go well because the constable didn't really help the situation. And so this particular landlord thought that the constable called the city on this particular owner because of just the way things didn't go in the best way possible. And that makes me sad because he explained how many properties he's done this with, how he's worked to work on the infill development, that there's a lot of different programs being started or created for this very type of situation. And I mean, this happened in August, and now they're dealing with the building of Unborn standards, which is interesting because you have this other person. There's another story, and I'm not sure if we're we'll talk about it in a minute, that they've been dealing with this for a long time, and nothing's been done. So the timing did seem a little suspect, and it seems sad to me that there are people who use their positions of authority to cause problems for people that are not really necessary. But I thought it was interesting that the city had one presentation, one picture of what was going on, and then you came in with the other part of the story, and you realized that there was a lot of good stuff happening. People were being decent with people who needed help, and it was just kind of bizarre how quickly it went down because of the interaction with trying to get the tenant out of the property so they could improve it. All right, the next one, I thought, man, these poor people, they have been dealing with this property for 10 years, complaining to the city. And it's this picture. So what was mentioned by one of the neighbors is there's 13 cars that is at this place, and it's a really complicated mess. There's a lady who has some health problems. She has a son who's living there. She's also very generous and lets people stay in her home because they need a place to stay. However, some of those people have been caught with narcotics in the premises, and there's been suspect of particular narcotic distribution going on. The neighbors have just been dealing with a lot of stuff. And the guy that enforces code violations was there, and he said he thought things were going well, but clearly things were not improved. And so when the lady got up and talked about how she's been hospitalized and she thought something was taken care of, that was not. And, it's really hard. And I really have a lot of respect for this board because you have to look at what it is and not let your emotions play too much on you, because at the end of the day, she hadn't really done what she needed to do. And so this property is moving forward as planned. And I think this was an appeal for demo or condemnation. I can't remember which, but it was denied. And they moved forward as planned because it had been going on so long and the neighborhood really needed some relief. And she had had plenty of time to solve her problems and was not in a place where she was going to be able to do much after that. All right. So I have only been really invested in this for about 6 months. Maybe a little bit longer, just in different capacity. And so I thought this was a really interesting, I'm trying to get this at the right size for us. I really thought this was an interesting end of the year summary for what has happened with the code compliance condemnation program. They have different funding from the city to help with those who need demo of a house that is no longer livable. It's condemned. And they also have, federal funding to help cover some of these costs. And so there's it's a big team that works together. They said they had 56 new condemnation cases, and that was up from fiscal year 2022. And he mentioned why it was that way. I wasn't able to catch that, but I thought that was an interesting, I like numbers because you can compare. There were 235 dilapidated structure cases with 441 last year. So that went down. 56 cases completed, 18 more than last year. So they're successful there. 55 brought before the Board of Building and Standard, 4 more than last year. 22 were resolved without going to the Board of Building Standards, and 14 were city-funded demolitions, and 14 CDBG funded by owner consent, and those are federal funds. And the average cost per demolition was about $7,800, which was pretty close to last year, and there were 10 owners who repaired structures, and there were 9 owners who actually demoed their own buildings. So they're making progress. I can't imagine. I've been a little overwhelmed watching this particular board meeting because of all they went through. They did 9 cases this meeting, and it was just case after case after case. And so I appreciate what they're doing. I know that there's always room for improvement, but from what I can see, I'm impressed with their balance of compassion and sticking to the timeline and helping things move forward. Now we're to my favorite meeting of the week, the city council meeting. I love city council meetings. I just learned so much, and I love being around people and watching them because I'm a people watcher, and it's really exciting to me. So I noticed that there were some presentations of awards. Leslie Andrews, who's in the black and white, she was honored for her 20 years of service. There was 20 years of service for a firefighter, and this guy, we've talked about him before. He won the award for the West Texas Parks and Recreation Professional or whatnot. Now, why I have this video showing while we were talking is I did want to point out the fact that we have a this is the guy from the Veterans Land Board, and he wanted to bring up the guy that runs it. His name is Dr. John Kelly, and what they do is they get customer feedback from all the people who interact with what happens at the particular location, and they give different levels of it, and they take their information. And I think overall in Texas, it's like at 98% approval, customer satisfaction. But Abilene got recognized because Abilene has 99.03% customer satisfaction rate for the Veterans Cemetery. So kudos to Dr. John Kelly and all he does to make Abilene a great place. And I know that that helps encourage and inspire other people to improve what they're doing with their own Veterans Cemetery. So now moving on to the consent agenda. I was trying to think of what to talk about, and I know I'm probably going a lot longer than I really want to, but I really think it's important for us to discuss these things that are passed on consent agenda because a lot of them are administrative. There's a lot of things that happen that I don't think many of us catch, but I think it's important for us to start learning some of the language and seeing how things work so that we can be more informed and educated when they come up in the future. And so there are some things that happen that it's just kind of neutral information, but I want you to know about it. So this was a particular item. It was purchasing a wheel loader for water utilities. And I thought this was interesting. I looked at another particular purchase they made, and I was like, oh gosh, let's look and see, because I want to celebrate when we see good fiscal responsibility. And then I found this, and I was like, oh man, this really stinks. I'm not sure how this happened, but what happened was, the unit was damaged in between when they were budgeting for the year and when the fiscal year started. So this was not on the budget from what I can tell. And so the funds for this particular purchase will be provided by the water utilities. And while it was not budgeted, they had to replace it. So the purchase was $159,000. and they were able to trade in $22,000, leaving the total price was $137,000. So these are problems that happen. I mean, how many of you know that you know what your budget is and your car transmission goes out, or you have a flat tire? These are things that happen, and it just happens the same in the city. But I think it's important for us to pay attention to these because we see how things go. It's provided by water utilities. I'm going to scroll down real quick and see if, it just talks about that. So I did want to point out that $137,000 was spent that was not planned. But the reason why I showed you that is because now I get to go look. This was a front loader they needed to purchase. The budgeted cost was $450,000, but it only cost $430,000. $430,000. That's right. And they saved $19,000. Woohoo! And so now what I understand, and I'm not sure if this happens, this is where I'm still learning, but does this money now go into the minor improvement project fund to help fund other expenditures they have? We'll have to watch and see, because if we see something like $19,000 being added, or, we can now know. And that's why I'm showing you this, because when they save money, they throw it in this pot called minor improvement project fund, to my understanding. And now I need to see if this happens with the water stuff, this particular truck, or is this something that's going to happen? This is going to someplace else. That's what we're learning. But I thought it was important for us to watch and pay attention to. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the advanced water well repair, the high services pump number 4. Again, this is something you're like, I don't really care about pump number 4, but we've got to start learning how they spend their money and where it goes. So it gives us this great explanation. The original contract cost for removing, transporting, and disassembling and inspection of the pump is $23,500 is what they budgeted. But the contract price total repair is now $170,000, almost $171,000, which exceeds the $50,000 purchasing limit required. So they have to come to the city council and approve it. So that's, again, I'm pretty new at this, so my first thought is, wow, that's like $150,000 that wasn't budgeted. How do they handle that, and where does that money come from? But I think it's important for us to know these things happen and to begin watching so we can see what happens in these particular areas. It comes from the funds designated for capital improvement projects. So again, I would never assume that just because I read this, I can completely understand it. So I would ask more questions to go, okay, so it came from the capital improvement project fund, which they have for the water supply stuff. Does that mean we're spending now $150,000 more? And those are things that I'm not to the point where I really need to know that information, but I'm watching and I'm keeping that in check. And so the next thing that we look here, so that is interesting, and I'm taking note. And so now I'm to the next one, which is, we just talked about the water pump replacement. So now they actually have a water line replacement project. And again, I'm taking my time to show you this because I think these are conversations we need to start thinking through our brain. Tell me more about this. Not, I don't care. I don't need to know this. It doesn't matter to me, because it does. We have to start learning how they budget, how they prepare, and how they take care of our city. And these are the ways we start to get a grid. Like we do classical education, we put a pegboard so that the next time we see something about this, we can put that little thing in the peg and go, oh yeah, that makes more sense now. I understand. Okay, so they offered bids to this. They got 4 bids, and they're replacing 3,455 feet of 6-inch pipe along South 14th. And I thought it was interesting that it's going to cost $582,000. And I thought it was interesting that they noted here special considerations that they had already awarded to the Bonnke brothers a sidewalk repair project of 6,100 linear feet. So they noted that they're going to replace the water pipe before they replace the sidewalk, which makes a bunch of sense. And I do know that is something that they've talked about, making sure they're more effective in how they use their funding so that they don't do things backwards, so that there's a lot of stuff going in the wrong direction. So this will come from the Water Utilities Fund designated for capital improvement projects. And maybe one day I'll get to the budgets. Maybe I'll be able to tell you about more of that. But right now, we're just sticking to the basics. It's important to know that they get stuff from the water utility funds, because this is where a lot of people come in and say, well, why didn't you spend that money for this? Why didn't you spend it for the streets? You need to know that there's funding for certain projects out of certain funds, but we can't just use water utility funds for street improvement. We've got to stay in the right places with the funding and where they're allotted. And so that's where I'm hoping you will come to some knowledge of that. Okay, so the next part is what we talked about already a little bit. Actually, I'll get here. I had those a little bit out of order, but that's okay. So this is the first reading, and every ordinance presented by the city has 2 readings. So this is the first reading, and it was not addressed out loud, except for one lady made a public comment about it, but there was nothing addressed on it. And this is the first reading. What I wanted to show you, and I may have to come in because I haven't told you, I found something really cool. So normally when I would come on the city website, I would come up here and it would be like, you have the agenda or the agenda packet, and you have to download an entire packet, which I think it's over 300 pages or something like that. I can't remember now. I've slept since then. But now they have these little dividers or headlines where you can come in here, and if I don't want to download the whole packet, I just come click here and it opens up to the right place. So what I want to show you is here is where you actually look at what they're changed. They give you all the information. They're not keeping anything a secret. You don't have to wonder. You don't have to go, is it good or bad? You just read it. So here's what they did. They do a strikeout line of what they're taking out. And so number 3 used to say abortion-inducing drugs are declared to be contraband, and we declare the possession of abortion-inducing drugs within the city limits to be an unlawful act. And you can go, see, Tammy, that's what they said in the newspaper, or that's what they said I can't remember which one it was. Well, the problem is we're reading a section of this. Had you read at the beginning what each term meant, this would make a lot more sense. You can't read it out of context. You have to understand the way they explain terms. It's a really thorough and exhaustive process. So if you just read this, you could go, oh my gosh, it's contraband. It's not. But here's what they said instead. And I'm not going to read it, but I want to show you. You can look and see what's going on. You don't have to trust people to tell you. You can come through here and see, okay, here they talked about this too. And you can see they made it red so that you can see exactly what was changed in these 11 pages. I'm not sure why there's only 11 pages. That's kind of weird to me. You would think they would have all of the pages in there so that people could read it, but that's neither here nor there. This is the part they decided to show you. And so this is where they're amending it. And then I can even show you right here that they don't have the presentation slides, which is weird. I don't know why. Here's the entire ordinance, but again, it's only 14 pages. So I'm not really sure what they did here, and I wasn't prepared to talk about it. I thought there might be presentation, but because it was not in the regular agenda, they didn't have presentations slides for that. All right, so next, let's go to this. We are now to the regular agenda. And again, I'm sorry this is taking so long, but I do think there's some key details I want you to know about. So this is an agreement for revamping the Comprehensive Land Code Development. Comprehensive Land Development Code. Okay, so they're going to rewrite it. And I think it's really fun for me because I'm always trying to learn facts and information, and I really feel like I'm coming to this with not a lot of knowledge, so I'm having to trust some of the process until I get more knowledge in my tool belt and use that. So they talked about they changed the land code. It was the last time was in 2010, and before that was I want to say the 70s or 80s. And so what's interesting is I talked to someone who's done a lot of work with the city and in this particular capacity, and he's like, that wasn't right. It was 2008. And it's like, wow, even sometimes they present information that because they didn't explain why they used the 2010 date, we don't know, well, were they wrong? Or were they just using some data that made more sense to use the 2010 date? Regardless, it hasn't been changed in a long time. And what Robert Hanna was saying, our city manager, he was saying, the code was written accurately, but there was some confusion on what the interpretation was. And so what they found is over the years, the employees would add their clarifications. I would like to think like little sticky notes to say, this is what this means. And don't forget, this is what this means. Now they really didn't do that. But I'm just thinking of how I allow to make notes so that I can understand what was meant. Well, the problem is when employees leave, the new employees come in and they're like, I don't get it. And they make new changes. And so what they want to do is create a land development code that is readable as is. And it sounds like a wise decision. To me, it sounds like there's some things that could be helpful in doing it. They say that thanks to the presentation by the company, they are now partnering or paying to help them do it. They say that a land development code only lasts between 10 and 20 years. So, it's been about 10 years, even if we go with the 2010 date, and it sounds like it's something that could be helpful. We are hiring as a city, a company to come and do it. And we have learned that there are things that our city employees are very gifted at and they can do well. However, if we add to their workload, they are going to have to choose. There's only so much time in a day for them to accomplish things. And so we want to make sure that this is done well. And it also gives some sort of a moderator to help work with the community and the city to find a common ground on how to write this correctly. And I do think it's important to note that this is for the benefit of the community, because the community is why we have these needs, and the city is to uphold those because they are the ones that enforce the things that our community needs. So they're going to be having a review board with several people on it from different aspects of our community, and I think that will be good, and I look forward to it. But because what they're doing with this particular company that they're hiring is that they will have community input. Like, we're going to get to have a say. So I'm excited to be able to pay attention and say, hey, listen, here's a place for us to give our input. Let's join in and show up. I mean, we don't always have to give our thoughts. We can just be present to show that it's important and it matters. So that's happening. It is going to cost a total of, I believe it's $402,000 or 407. Let me see. Here it is. There it is, 403, not even close. $403,000. And so they'll pay those in 2 different installments over 2 different years. They expect this to take a year to get it set up, and then another 6 months or more to get it all worked out so that it's beneficial to our city. So about 18 months of this project happening. So I think this sounds like a good idea. I don't know what else to offer because I have no knowledge of these things, but that's okay. All right. So the next thing on the agenda, this was moved up because the mayor had to leave early and they needed, I guess, a quorum, or I'm not sure exactly why this was brought up because, I think I know why, because several members on the council have connections to ACU, so they couldn't vote on this. And this is the property next to Allen Ridge over on the north of Judge Ely. The north side of Judge Ely, I guess it's on the west side of Judge Ely. And this is the neighborhood that has been concerned that this development was going to use their alley right here if you're looking on the screen. And so they've come in, created their own alleyway for this particular project. And it's interesting to me because I still can't figure out what they're doing. Now, part of it is because they don't have to give me all the information. I don't have to know, and I don't know if it's necessarily worth me asking. But to me, this looks like some kind of residential space right here, and maybe this is a senior living. I'm not sure. It's residential, so there's something residential, but then again, I know that in the residential zoning, it doesn't have to be residential. It can be something else, or it can be residential and it's not the residential like people living in the residential. It's just something close to residential. I'm still learning these words and these terminology, but I thought I would do my due diligence and try and figure out what is going in here. And I can't really tell, but I do know it's going to have lots of parking. There was a chart that I'm not showing you right now that said it required no residential parking. So to me, that makes me think this is just stores. But then there's something about living. So again, I'm sorry. I'm just an average citizen, and this is beyond my pay grade, I think. So that's okay. That was the last thing on the agenda, and so I do want to wrap up our time together. Thank you for sticking with me. I do hope you're starting to get layers upon layers so that you can understand this without being like at a fire hydrant overwhelmed. One of the things I want to leave with you is I think it's really important for us to make sure that we are plugging in weekly to check on the city calendar and see what's going on, which leads me to our weekend preview. So here we go. We're going to look at what's going on this week. There's not a lot of happening in the rest of the month, but I do think it's important. The Board of Adjustments was canceled for December 12th. I'm not sure why. They do have their agenda in minutes, so you can look on that, which means they probably have an agenda packet so you can see what they were going to talk about. There may have been no projects to discuss. We'll have to look and see what that's all about. And then the Airport Development Board is on December 13th at 3:30, and that is recorded. So if you can't go, I'd encourage you to watch. It's a very fascinating one to understand how they utilize our airport to bring in some revenues to our city. And that's all for this week. I will say to keep your eyes and ears posted because the last council meeting is on December 22nd. And this is where I want you to come. You go to the city council, the city website, check their calendar, see what's going on for the week. There's a lot of things going on in the city. As far as like at the convention center, there is a Nutcracker Ballet tonight at the convention center. There's Blippi, and then there's lots of lots of things happening at the library. And I just want to let you know, You ask questions, you contact people who work for the city, and sometimes things really go the way you want them to. In fact, I just had an encounter that I practice what I'm teaching you to do. Is there something I was concerned about that was on the calendar at one of the city locations, and I emailed the correct person. I said, hey, listen, this is concerning to me. Can you help me out? And before it was all said and done, it was resolved to my satisfaction. And I was pleasantly surprised because my instinct is to go to city council and tell them how mad I am about it, or how I don't like it, or how I just want you to know that I know what's going on. And that's not healthy or appropriate. It's really appropriate for us to make sure that we are reaching out and following the steps to build rapport, build relationships, so that we can work together to do good things for Abilene. But one of the other things I wanted to point out to you that I noticed that one of our councilmen shared was that we really only have, and this may be kind of random, so forgive me if it's too random for you, but I thought it was important to share. We have about 25 chronic homeless people in Abilene. And I thought that was really interesting because when we are doing local elections and local campaigns, you would think that we had an epidemic going on with so many homeless people. But when you're talking in a population of 120,000 people, that's not a high percentage, but it is a big campaign talking point. So those are back to what we talked at the beginning. You know the facts, you know the information, and know what's really the intent of going on. It is a great talking point, but it's not a huge problem, which is confirmed by talking to people who actually work in this particular area. People on hard times is far more important to deal with, and that comes through good economic development and maintaining a healthy city. And so I think that's interesting to notice. And I think it was good because the councilman was trying to promote some good opportunity for people who are struggling in that area, and that they have, there's things in Abilene. Our city has done a good job making sure we take care of those who have needs in that area. And so I'm grateful for that. So I guess with that, we are ending this podcast on a puzzling note, because we just get to go, what are they really telling us? And how do I make sure I find out and know what's going on? And I hope you've learned from some of the things we've discussed today, how you can take that information and use it to help make an impact in Abilene in the big country, because we are always looking to make Abilene a better place to live for not only us, but for our future generations, because we have that responsibility. And so make sure you subscribe, you share, and you like our podcast so we can keep it going, and look forward to talking with you about our next Book by the Bite that's coming up. And there's just lots of good stuff going on. So I know this holiday season is busy for a lot of us, but make sure you stop and enjoy the moment, because it's the people in your life that make this season worth it. It makes enjoying the gifts that God has given us so much more enjoyable. And so I hope this podcast has helped you find ways to inform you, educate you, and empower you to make an impact in Abilene and the big country. Until next time.